Hi, this is Brent McKim, President of JCTA, and this is the first in a series of videos I'm doing to discuss what's been happening with proposals for the Kentucky teacher retirement system. This video is going to focus on the highlights of what has happened chronologically and particularly the engagement of our members along the way. Going back to the fall of 2017, Governor Bevin proposed what he called a Keeping the Promise plan, pretty ironically named, considering that it violated many of the promises in the inviolable contract. But in response to the many draconian elements of his proposed package of changes and the bill draft that he developed to encompass those, Kentucky teachers and their allies in the Kentucky Public Pension Coalition all across the state engaged legislators in forums back home, held meetings in schools with them, attended rallies, and pushed back in such a significant way that although the governor announced when he unveiled his plan that he had more than enough votes to pass the plan in both chambers, and quite frankly, that was probably true when he said it, as a result of the amazing pushback by KEA and JCTA members all across the state and our allies, that quickly changed. And it became clear that the governor did not have the votes that he needed to pass the bill and was never able to call the special session that he wanted to pass the bill. Eventually, he had to concede the point and announce that it would be taken care of in the legislative session. When we got into the legislative session, JCTA and KEA organized with our partners in the Public Pension Coalition to have an unprecedented presence by current teachers and other public employees wearing very visible red shirts in opposition, and our retired educators as well. Every day of the legislative session when the legislature was in session in a very visible, high-profile way. In fact, we turned out so many people to Frankfort day after day after day in ways that legislators that had been there 20 years or more had never seen before, that was the talk of every legislator in the legislature. Oh my goodness, what have we done? To give you an example, to get from the annex where all the committee meetings occur over to the actual Capitol building, there is a tunnel that goes underground so that legislators don't have to go out in the cold in the winter and in the weather. And we lined that tunnel with so many red-shirted educators that they had to run the gauntlet with educators holding signs. We had a rotating basis where we had different school districts coming in on different days so that we didn't hit any one district over and over on the in the same week. But on a rotating basis, we had teachers in there, active and retired, and it became such a gauntlet to run that many of those legislators that were advocates of the bill were uncomfortable using the tunnel, and they started walking above ground through the cold to get over to the Capitol. And yet we turned out so many people with red shirts, so many members, that we were able to line both the tunnel and above ground, so it didn't matter whether they went through the tunnel or tried to go out through the weather. They could not get from the annex to the Capitol without having to walk and look in the face teacher after teacher after teacher, active and retired. Again, all of this had a significant impact so that when Senate Bill 1 was actually called in committee, it had most but not all of the worst elements from the governor's plan removed and or scaled back. When we learned that the bill was going to be heard in committee, which didn't occur until about 2/3 of the way through the legislative session, we made an extra effort to turn out. And kudos to the JCTA and KEA retired who showed up in droves, so much so that when they had the committee hearing, they first did a hearing without a vote, and then eventually came back later with a few days later with an actual vote. When they had the first committee meeting, they used their largest meeting room, and it completely filled up and overflowed. They put us in an overflow room. It filled up and overflowed. They put us in another overflow room. It filled up and overflowed, as did a third, as did a fourth, and so on, until they didn't have any more overflow rooms. And then we just had people in the hallway, and it was like nothing any legislator had ever seen before. They had never seen that kind of engagement on a single bill. And so that was when they had the first hearing for Senate Bill 1. Based on that, that made them even more nervous. They went back, they whittled more negative things out of the bill. Every iteration, there were more bad things removed. They eventually, a few days later, came back with a committee substitute that they did vote out of committee. Again, we had the room packed, overflow rooms overflowing, and so forth. So a significantly scaled back version of Senate Bill 1, which was a scaled back version of what the governor brought, passed out of committee and headed to the Senate floor. We weren't sure when they were going to call it. When we learned when they were going to call it, the KEA president got on the phone to every superintendent within about 45 minutes of Frankfurt and asked for educators to show up the next morning. And those superintendents are to be commended because they worked with KEA, and we had hundreds of active teachers in addition to our retirees who showed up and our Kentucky Public Pension Coalition partners. And we had those hundreds of active, engaged members chanting in front of the Senate chambers in a way that none of those senators had ever seen before. And quite frankly, going into that vote, the Senate leadership was confident they had yes votes to spare in the Republican caucus. But by the time they walked through that chanting crowd and the chants reverberated in the chamber, they no longer had a majority to pass it. When they caucused and counted votes, they could not count to 20 to pass the bill out of the chamber. They tried all day, and as the day went on, we just got more people that were showing up as educators, and chanting got louder and louder, and eventually they had to concede they did not have the votes to pass the bill out of the Senate, and they had to send it back to committee. That's where it was until the 29th of Thursday, the 29th of March, when on the House side, they took a dramatically scaled back version of Senate Bill 1 and substituted it for a wastewater bill, Senate Bill 151, and introduced that in the House State Government Committee. The scaled back bill had, by this point, all the COLAs restored, and in fact, there were no changes whatsoever for current retirees. There was only one change for current actives, which was a cap on the further accumulation of sick days for retirement calculations, and then a cash balance plan, which was a scaled back and highly revised version of what the governor wanted. The governor wanted new hires to go into the private sector and have to pay high commissions. This kept new hires in TRS paying into our retirement system, and just changed the plan design to a cash balance plan. Now, this is a bad bill, don't get me wrong, because that new cash balance plan did not have the assured benefits that our current defined benefit plan has. But compared to where we started, even that plan for the new hires was a dramatically scaled back and much less negative change from what we started with. So based on that, the House and Senate leadership assured their members that because this would have no effect on retirees and only had one provision that would affect current active teachers, that there would be little resistance and it would be safe to vote yes. And based on those assurances, the House, by a narrow margin of 49 to 46, passed the bill that really should have never been able to reach the House floor because state law requires an actuarial analysis that the bill did not have, but the committee, in clear violation of that statute, passed it out of committee anyway to the floor. It narrowly passed 49 to 46, went over to the Senate on a bipartisan vote with several Republicans, including Julie Rocky Adams from Jefferson County. Thank you, Julie. With several Republicans voting no on the bill still had enough votes to pass out of the Senate, and it has now gone to the governor's desk for either his signature into law or his veto. We are asking the governor to vote no. We're asking, in fact, every Kentucky citizen who cares about being able to attract and keep quality teachers in the future to demand that the governor vote to veto Senate Bill 151 and not sign it into law, but actually reject it and veto it, because it will harm our ability to attract and keep quality teachers in the future, and it includes a violation of the inviolable contract by freezing the additional accumulation of sick days for current active teachers. So that's where we are right now. That's an update. I hope this has been helpful. Look for future videos to discuss other aspects of what's been happening with our teacher retirement system. Thank you.